Welcome to While You're Reading, the podcast that unpacks the hype behind everything from book talk obsessions to Booker Prize winners. Hello, Ellen.
Hello, Ellie. I'm very excited this week because we are talking about the Hunger Games series. Mm-hmm. The new book by Suzanne Collins, Sunrise on the Reaping, just came out. It has taken book talk by storm. We are going to refrain from spoiling Sunrise on the Reaping, but we are going to presume that you have either read or watched the Hunger Games trilogy, and any details that we reference in the novel, The Sunrise on the Reaping, are going to have already been talked about in the original Hunger Games books. So we won't be spoiling it, but we'll be referencing things that have been referenced before.
Perfect.
Does that make sense?
Sounds like a plan to me.
For anyone who doesn't know, the new Hunger Games book is set 25 years before the original trilogy, and it follows Haymitch, which, if you remember in the films, it was the character played by Woody Harrelson. He's the mentor to Katniss and Peeta. He's a drunkard. He's often the kind of comic relief. And in this novel, he is a teenager living in District 12. He has a mother, a little brother, a girlfriend, and then, lo and behold, the 50th Hunger Games quarter quell happens. That is going to require 48 tributes, and Haymitch is reaped. And he's very similar to Katniss in that he's a rebellious spirit and tries his best to rebel against the capital in any way that he can.
Indeed.
That's all we'll say.
As my cat is currently rebelling on my desk.
Walking back, I can see walking back and forth across the desk.
She loves this series. She loves Buttercup in particular.
Haymitch.
She's fangirling over Buttercup from the original trilogy.
Aww.
Indeed. But Sunrise and the Reaping is a really interesting one. We kind of know what happens, but not what happens based on the Hunger Games book. So no spoilers here today, but we will definitely be touching on the books and the movies, as you say, the originals, as well as the previous prequels, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes.
Suzanne Collins, she loves a little mouthful. I was like, initially it was Hunger Games, Catching Fire, Mockingjays. Easy,
Very
simple
easy.
to the point. Then it was Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and now Sunrise on the Reaping. We're getting a little wordy, Suzanne, but still love you. We had both read the original trilogy as teenagers, but my experience of reading this series as an adult is very different.
Yep.
Have you reread the Hunger Games trilogy as an adult, or have you just read the new books?
I re-listened to them. So I read them as paperbacks in 2 sittings when I was a teenager, all 3 books in 2 sittings. I was obsessed. And then during the pandemic, when I knew that the prequel was coming out, I listened to the 3 original books because I didn't have my copies with me. I was at my parents' house for the lockdown. So I ended up listening to the audiobooks. Exactly. But actually that was really fun because it was a new format. So it was actually quite interesting revisiting something I knew really well from my teenage years. And that was similar to kind of Sunrise and the Reaping and also Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So every experience has been different, I think.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think I've reread the original trilogy twice as an adult, maybe. I remember I was the same when I was a teenager. I read the first book, and then I think I finished it in a day or something, and then I went to my parents and I was like, can we go to the bookshop? And they're like, we were just there. And I was like, I know, but I need the second book. So I think we got the second book, and then we were in the bookshop and they're like, well, we might as well just get you the third one. And I was like, thank you. And I just tore through them. And even as an adult, I was like, oh, I know everything that happens, but I still found them just as gripping. And as well, I think so much of the political commentary and the social elements of this novel completely went over my head when I was a child. I was like, capital? What could that be referring to? Oh, what this fictional dystopia. It seems so crazy. And as an adult, I'm like, this is actually quite depressing.
Just depressingly familiar as well.
Yes.
It's maybe not familiar in the sense of kind of capitals and districts and such, but the vibe. You know, they be vibing. It feels the vibe. It feels really kind of familiar, and that's kind of scary, unfortunately. But that's something I didn't. Again, as a teenager, I didn't recognize it for what it was. I used to think of these as really adventurous novels and a kind of a teenage coming of age story. And then as an adult, I was like, this is horrific. How did I, as a teenager, not recognize this for what it is? But teenagers, their brains aren't developed clearly, and children's brains aren't developed in the same way as an adult. You don't recognize the horrors as much as you do as an adult of these novels. And I think in Sunrise and the Reaping, that the reading experience of this one as an adult, and also it being an adult novel because it's tailored to people who read the books as teenagers, as children, and therefore are now adults, was a very different reading experience. But I do have a very important question for you, which will make or break our friendship, I think, Ellen. Are you Team Gale or Team Peeta?
Oh, Team Peeta.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah, so who's Team Gale?
I know.
The war criminal.
Oh, yeah. Team Gale was a really interesting character. Very interesting plot twists along the way in the original trilogy, but I was such a Peeta fangirl. Yeah. Such a Peeta fangirl.
Yeah.
Loved him.
I love Peeta, and I think I kind of forgot from like watching the movies and then going back to the books how, you know, peace and love to Josh Hutcherson, but in the novels I'm like, Peeta's so charming, and every time he comes over I'm like, aw, Peeta. When you read it when you're like 13 or whatever, you're like, oh, 16-year-olds, they're adults, like they're ancient.
Oh yeah.
And then you read it now and you're like, wow, like a 16-year-old is being murdered in cold blood. It's very different once you have that like perspective. And as well, just like the violence, it goes from being like, haha, like that guy got beheaded, to now just like, oh my god, this is quite a gruesome description. And I think you said when we were like talking before, it went from being like an adventure action series to being a horror series, which I think is very accurate. First 2008, then 2009, 2010 for the 3 books, and then we had our 10-year break before it's Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So you read Ballad of Songbirds when it came out?
I did. I think, to be honest, I read all of the prequels within a week of them releasing. So I got Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes in May 2020, and then I got Sunrise and the Reaping the day. I was meant to get it on the day it published, but it arrived late on the Friday. Oh. I was devastated, but it did arrive, and I was straight in. I did pre-order as well, which is something rare for me, but Hunger Games was my fandom growing up. So
really?
Yeah, very much so. I was a Hunger Games through and through. I didn't do Divergent. I did Twilight to an extent, but it was Hunger Games was my ride or die.
Did you have like a Hunger Games Tumblr or anything?
I didn't know, but to be honest, I didn't know how to create one at that point. I had a BlackBerry. I didn't have an iPhone or anything. I was not tech savvy until I was in my 20s, but I just had all the books and all the posters. I was the first in line at the movie release dates. Loved it, lived for it, great.
I didn't know that Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came out in 2020 because I read it like right before the film came out. I think initially I'd like maybe heard of it coming out, and I was like, it seems kind of like just a like cash grab or whatever prequel thing, blah blah. I don't really have any interest in it. And then I read it and I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, Suzanne Collins. This was actually fantastic, and I really liked the book a lot. I wasn't expecting to, but I think Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is from Coriolanus Snow's perspective, or President Snow, and he's a teenager, and it's about like the 10th Hunger Games. So it's before it becomes very kind of reality TV and orchestrated kind of. And I found it so interesting because it's the only book in all of the Hunger Games books, including Sunrise and the Reapings, that we see the Hunger Games from an outside perspective. It's like not a competitor in the games. And also I think it did a really good job of like fleshing out the world and like the lore of the Hunger Games, and kind of understanding Snow, understanding the power dynamics in the capital, and like how things became like how they are then when we see it like 65 years later in the original trilogy. And I think it really added to like my experience or like understanding of the Hunger Games. And I think after I read that, then I was like, oh, I gotta go back and like reread the first 3, and they were just so fantastic, and I just love them so much. And I think I enjoyed Sunrise and the Reaping, and we'll talk a little bit more about our opinions in a bit, but I think I preferred Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes.
Okay, I will save my opinion for later.
Interesting. Okay, so you said nothing at all, and yet you said so much. But it's interesting because the books are really drenched in violence, and like we kind of talked about this of reading it as a teenager versus an adult, but like I don't know if the violence is necessarily scaled up in like Sunrise on the Reaping, or if it feels much more impactful because we're adults.
Yeah, it's kind of, I wonder if it's a bit of both, actually, because I do think being adults, we definitely do feel it more, perhaps, in terms of we understand the consequences of it, and also the absolute heartlessness and mindlessness of it all. But I think on the other side as well, the book is bigger in terms of the font size is smaller, the text is bigger, it is written with adults in mind, the adults that were teenagers when Hunger Games came out, or children when Hunger Games came out. So I do think it is tailored for the adult perspective. But there are scenes in this, and obviously no spoilers, but there are deaths, which is to be expected in any Hunger Games novel, that are so descriptive and tragic and heartbreaking. And there's been countless videos on TikTok in particular where this has already got 49,000 videos of people just absolutely weeping because characters who may be big characters that may be small characters, just the descriptions of their deaths, their demises, are so awful. It's mind-blowing.
I wrote one line down that it's not a spoiler, but it's this, and it's just a small white skeleton stripped clean to the bone. Was one of the deaths. Ugh. Yeah, and I think it was the death that made me not quite cry, but like almost shed a tear.
Yeah, see, I don't cry, as you know, when I read books. I'm not really a crier, but I am that kind of shudder. What kind of reaction And there were a few scenes in Sunrise and the Reaping, quite early on, as well as in the middle and towards the end as well, that I was just like, what? What just happened? It's all a bit senseless in this novel. In a way, it's very well written and the plot is perfect. In my opinion, I absolutely... Well, I'll come on to that. But the but the kind of the deaths and everything else, similarly to kind of the Hunger Games, the first book in the series, the deaths are senseless and horrifying. There's something so powerful about that, and I think that's partially why people go back to it, because it is so violent and horrific, and this is about kids killing kids. Why would we read this? Why, as a culture, do we read this and find it entertaining, enjoyable, or something we want to talk about? But we do.
And I think it's interesting as well because of the YA series, I think The Hunger Games was one that appealed kind of across genders as well, because it does have a female protagonist, but it has all this action as well. Like, I feel like a lot of the other YA series that we saw, like Divergent and Twilight, were like very much kind of aimed towards women, or then you had other series aimed towards men, which I can't think of any.
The Maze Runner, I'd say, was more masculine, because it's partially because it's a male protagonist, but it's in the first book in the Maze Runner, I think it's a male is dropped into a kind of maze, literally a maze with just men and a woman. So of course it's very male gazy.
I liked it because it was Dylan O'Brien in the movie.
Oh my god, yeah, I watched all the movies because it was Dylan O'Brien.
I wonder as well if like we went from the kind of the dystopian fiction, which is very like bleak and kind of realistic, to the romantasy is more escapism, because as we grow up we're like, oh, like those threats are actually a lot realer than we thought, like climate change, because I think the Panem was destroyed, like North America was destroyed, I think because of climate change or climate war.
It was climate
kind
change
of
or an atom bomb or something like that, or nuclear warfare, I think was a big part of it as well.
It's something kind of deliberately vague.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's, you know, it's the fallout after these big, you know, threats that are now, as adults, we're like, oh no, those are real threats. And so maybe it's like, we kind of want those elements of like suspense and action and romance, but in something that feels less pressing, like it feels less close, maybe.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think the element for me that got me in particular as an adult, beyond the kind of the darkness and violence, was actually the class and the differences between classes, in terms of you've got the capital, and then to an extent District 1 and District 2, and then you have all the other districts, and it is that kind of lower class feeling. And the fact that District 12 is where Haymitch comes from, and also where Katniss comes from, our main protagonist in the Hunger Games trilogy and Sunrise and the Reaping, and District 12 is always considered the lowest of classes. They're just coal miners. They are considered to be, by the capital anyway, they're considered to be kind of animals. They're not even considered to be human. They're so degraded in that regard, but they are our underdogs. That's why we root for them, and why they're such an integral part to the rebellion. I think I learned a lot about class structure as a child from reading Hunger Games, actually. And seeing the movies and seeing the kind of disparities in particular, and visually seeing it, was important to me. And it was a big part of the marketing as well when the movies came out. There was billboards everywhere kind of talking about, as if that we were in the universe, there were billboards about Capital, and it was Capital Couture, you know, dress like your favourite hero and such. And it was very pantomime-y and out of this world, and very much tailored to the Hunger Games viewer and reader. Like, nobody that hasn't read or seen the movies would have cared about those billboards. They'd make no sense. But it was a very interesting marketing tactic, and something that has carried through, I think, in the universe as well, in terms of cosplay and such. Thankfully, not so much the class structures, but it is something we recognise today as being an issue. There are the upper classes, the lower classes, and the treatment of each is different.
I think a part of the reason for its like prevailing success is those themes of class inequality and war and corruption of power and everything that are, you know, feel more relevant than ever. And I remember as well last year at the Met Gala, when we saw like all these celebrities dressed up in you know, gowns and jewelry that cost hundreds of thousands, and outside of the Met, there were loads of people protesting against the genocide in Gaza. And I remember just like people talking about how dystopian it felt. And they were using the Hunger Games as an analogy. They're like, this looks like people from the Capitol like dressing up and just completely ignoring the real world. It's such a weird thing to put in perspective that the first Hunger Games came out before Barack Obama was elected. And like, that's how long ago it was. And it feels crazy. I don't know. They just, when I saw that fact, I was like, wow, it's been a long time. It's been a roller coaster. But I think Sunrise on the Reaping, like part of the reason that that story, as well as the Hunger Games original trilogy, like feels so relevant is because like we're seeing the rise of like right-wing political parties. We see Trump in the US like just stripping all of people's rights away and just completely abusing his power. We have like the real threat of climate change and war, the rising cost of living, the genocide in Gaza and in Palestine. It's just all of these elements that the Hunger Games like speak to. And I remember reading or rereading the Hunger Games as well. It was around, I think, last year, and they were talking about bombing hospitals, and it was at like the same time that Israel was bombing hospitals in Palestine. And I was like, wow, like it feels so dystopian, but it's so real. Sometimes like when these ideas feel so far removed, maybe people's way in is these kind of fictional tales. One of the things that I find really interesting about the Hunger Games trilogy and the series is how we see a lot with other dystopian series or young adult novels or whatever, or even just like adult films. Like if we think of The Matrix or Harry Potter or Divergent, there's always like a chosen one who is like destined to lead this revolution, and like they are going to like lead us out of this like inequality. They are going to like single-handedly take down the regime or whatever. And though Katniss is like the symbol of revolution and, you know, the Mockingjay, I think the third book in the Hunger Games series does a really good job of like with her doing the promo videos, kind of showing how she is kind of the like performing this chosen one, performing this leadership as a tool of inspiration to the masses. And like that is fundamentally where all of this change happens. Like it's really highlights the importance of like collective action and the like resistance at just a communal level. It's not like, oh, one person can like come in and swoop in and change everything. It's like we all need to like come together to protest, you know, human rights being stripped away or genocides happening, whatever. It's not down to any one person. It
takes a village, but in this case it takes a district.
Yes. It takes a district.
So in Sunrise and the Reaping, we are revisiting the world, and therefore we do meet some familiar characters. And one such familiar character, without giving away what happens, is Plutarch Heavensbee. And I'm telling you now, as a marketer in the publishing industry, if you want to understand marketing, if you want to understand media, study Plutarch Heavensbee. Honestly, I learned so much of what not to do and what to do in both, also in Mockingjay when he's creating all the propos of Katniss as the symbol, whilst this, you know, that it takes a district kind of does the rest of the work. And to be honest, it's similar in Sunrise and the Reaping to an extent.
Suzanne Collins doesn't give a lot of interviews because I was trying to find them when I was researching for this, and I found an interview from 2009 with NPR that she spoke to a journalist, and she was talking about her inspiration for the original Hunger Games, and was saying she was watching TV and she was like flipping through channels and she was seeing like war clips on one channel and like news coverage of this gruesome war, and then she flipped and be a reality TV competition, and she was like the juxtaposition but also like the parallels of these people fighting and like the weird kind of emotions that brings up, I think is exasperated nowadays because like on our feeds you can be clicking through someone's stories or like, and one you'll see, oh, a cute puppy, and the next you'll see a graphic about war, and it's just like we're constantly being inundated with all these kind of like so much information all the time, more than anyone has ever been given, and like the constant mix of emotions is just it's crazy how the inspiration for Suzanne Collins' novel is so much more relevant today in like a kind of media that wasn't even invented when she started writing the books, you know? Because I don't think Twitter existed in 2008. Maybe Instagram was like just invented. Maybe Facebook, but like not Instagram, to the same scale. And
Facebook and Twitter are around. Instagram, not quite. But this was before, I think 2008, 2009, 2010 was probably in literally smack bang when people were starting to finally get phones. In terms of teenagers starting to get phones. I certainly didn't have a phone until after I'd read the Hunger Games series. There's so many interesting lessons from the books that may or may not have been in Suzanne Collins' mind when she wrote them that are just so applicable to this day and age.
I feel like I could do like a full college course on or like a full college module on like the Hunger Games and like the politics and social commentary, and it's so interesting. So this episode is on Sunrise and the Reaping, and we've obviously spent a lot of time talking about the original Hunger Games trilogy. Do you think that you need to read the original trilogy in order to read this book?
Definitely is my go-to opinion. I think, to be honest, I would read them in the way they were published, in terms of reading Hunger Games, Catching Fire, Mockingjay, then going back and reading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and then reading Sunrise and the Reaping. If you were to read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and then Sunrise and the Reaping and keep it chronological, you would be spoiled for the big reveals that happen in the Hunger Games trilogy, just like you would be spoiled by the Star Wars kind of Luke, I am your father plot twist if you were to watch it. Spoiler alert. If you haven't known that, it's the biggest plot twist ever from the 70s. So I feel like, Sunrise and the Reaping is a really, really good book, but it was written with the fans of the Hunger Games in mind.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of Easter eggs. I was surprised as well reading this of the allusions to Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes as well, because there's an allusion to like Lucy Gray kind of subtly there, and like the Covey, which is like the group of people that she belonged to. And it was interesting because but it didn't feel like anything was kind of forced in. It wasn't like a kind of sketch where it was like a cameo. It was like, woo! And like someone opens the door and it's like Brad Pitt is on Friends or whatever, you know? It felt all very natural.
Yeah, I felt like we got a lot of origins in this without it kind of being twee. We found out more about our characters that we like or dislike, but without it kind of being thrown in, like you say. This wasn't any Brad Pitt cameo. These were well done stories. And I like the fact that a lot of them, there was a few touch and go kind of moments that needed to be because of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes in particular. But otherwise, throughout the book, it's not just a case of, there you go, you've seen them, now moving on to the actual storyline. There was always a kind of intention behind everything. So, which is why, and I'm going to say it now, which is why I absolutely adored Sunrise and the Reaping. It really absolutely brought me back to being a teenager and reading all the books, watching all the movies, fully immersed in it, loving these characters. I was having the kind of woohoo cheer moment when certain people arrived, and also the kind of not crying but the soul breaking moments of when certain things happened, which I didn't have with Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes because I think it happened so much earlier than the Hunger Games trilogy. It happened in the 10th Hunger Games as opposed to we're seeing the 74th Hunger Games by the time we meet Katniss. So I didn't mind it, and I much preferred the movie to the book of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which I was surprised by. I really did, because I found the book confusing. I found Coriolanus Snow's story odd, to be honest. But then also I remember when it was announced in the publishing industry, there was a bit of an uproar from the fandom because people were like, why would we want to know Coriolanus Snow's background? We know he's a villain. We know he's not a nice guy. Why do we want Haymitch's story? We want this story, we want that story. And there was a general call, like, why aren't we seeing Haymitch and where he came from? And why do we have to see Coriolanus Snow? And it was interesting. It did do well, but it didn't do anywhere near as well as Sunrise on the Reaping did.
That's so interesting. Because emotionally, I, like, felt more with this book, like, seeing those old faces again, the old friends. But I think Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was, for me, added more to like fleshing out the world of the Hunger Games. And I thought Coriolanus was an interesting character. He's kind of an unreliable narrator. Maybe because I've reread the Hunger Games like quite recently, I felt kind of being the routine of like, okay, so it's the normal life, it's the reaping, it's the like prep, their interview, they're in the arena, blah blah blah. I kind of like, it works well and it's a great formula, but I kind of felt like, oh, it's a bit repetitive compared to the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which was like just completely different. And so I feel like there were some elements that I enjoyed on like a narrative level. I'm like, oh, this is like fun to read. I like the plot. But I think I appreciated the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes more for like kind of what it added to the world, if that makes sense.
Sunrise on the Reaping has done incredibly well. It came out on the 18th of March, and within a week, it has sold 1.5 million copies worldwide. We actually don't know yet how many copies it sold in the UK. They haven't revealed the number, but they did reveal that it has made £1.5 million in revenue, which is a very high number for one book in 1 week. And actually, that is also Scholastic, who's the publisher in the UK. That is their biggest first week launch since 2007, which was The Golden Compass, when The Golden Compass movie came out. Wow, so Northern Lights. So really random, I know, but that sold 1.48 million pounds in revenue in its first week when The Golden Compass movie came out with like Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig. And then it's now been beaten by Sunrise and the Reaping. So it's proven incredibly popular. It's also, Sunrise and the Reaping is also the number one book worldwide in all English language speaking countries that sell it. So Australia, US, Canada, UK. It is the number one book.
Ireland.
Which accounts, Ireland, there you go. Which accounts for why it has sold so many copies worldwide. It has proven incredibly popular, which I find fascinating because they announced it in October 2024. They revealed a trailer for it in December around Christmas in 2024. And then 3 months later, it sold that many copies. That doesn't happen. But this fandom, it's going strong so many years later. But how they marketed Sunrise, they didn't try and reach new readers. This is not a book for anybody that hasn't read Hunger Games. As I said, this is all about reaching the people that love that series, that love the movies, that loved ballads. And instead, they've really just driven all of their marketing efforts to kind of getting fans to midnight launches, to all the people that dress up and cosplay as characters and getting people to dress up as their favourite districts. So I think the Works did a great one where they had 12 stores in the UK become districts. Cool. So you could go to your preferred district if you were local, which was great. And then Waterstones did 110 midnight launches. They re-released all the Hunger Games books that have been published in paperback in February as well, which is a great lesson in how to use the backlist to market the front list. It doesn't feel like a money-grabbing title. It feels like it was really thought through, like the characters, the plot line, how it all works, and it really talks to the fandom, which I think is its strongest strength. It's not trying to reinvent the wheel. It is just giving the fans what they want, and it really worked, in my opinion.
I agree. It's so interesting because Haymitch is someone that we see like so honestly so little of when we like if you put all his appearances together, but he is kind of one of the side characters that makes such an impact, and like we know enough about him to know that he is a kind of tragic figure, but we don't really know what that tragedy is. And we know that, you know, he's an alcoholic, he sleeps with a knife in his hand, but we don't know any more. It's just a great book of like finding out everything that happened to him and like everything behind the psychology of his character. And as well, like it's like fan service, but it's not like empty fan service, if that makes sense.
It's a really good story.
Yeah, gives fans what they want while also respecting their like time, their energy, and their money for the series. It's not just like we're gonna rewrite this book from PETA's perspective, like Stephanie Meyer did with Twilight.
Yeah, Stephanie Meyer, Midnight Sun, and all of that. That just feels messy and lazy. This feels interesting and intriguing, and I'm really looking forward to the movie as well. I think the movies for the original trilogy did a good job. And I will be thinking who I will cast as Haymitch, because this is going to be an interesting role.
Also, is he going to be 16 or is he going to be 32?
He'll be 26 playing 16. They always are. So we know your opinion on Sunrise and the Reaping versus Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but in terms of what are you going to do with your copy of Sunrise and the Reaping? Are you going to shelve it? Are you going to share it? Or are you going to shred it?
I think I'd probably share it to any of my friends that would be interested in reading, but I'd want it back, you know? Because I don't know if I'll be rereading it in the next like couple years, but I mean, I reread The Hunger Games twice as an adult and loved them, so maybe I could definitely see myself revisiting it. What do you think? What are you going to do?
I'm definitely shelving it. I will be putting it alongside my original 2008-2009 copies of the Hunger Games books, although they look incredibly different. If you are seeing the video of this, you will see that one's very black and action-packed and a bit like Action Man, if anyone remembers those dolls. And then you've got Sunrise and the Reaping that's all purple and gold and pretty. But I will be putting them together, I'll be shelving them. But I did get rid of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I did not shred it, but I did give it to charity. So I didn't keep that one.
Well, thank you everyone for listening to our episode of Why You're Reading. I hope you enjoyed. Let us know if you have read Sunrise on the Reaping, if you're going to read it, what your thoughts are on that novel and the Hunger Games franchise. Feel free to rate us on Spotify and Apple, and we will see you in our next episode. Bye.
Bye.